I was reaching for a carton of milk when the officer's hand clamped down on my arm. The cold click of metal closed around my wrist, and before I could even turn fully, the second cuff bit into my other arm. My knees felt weak, my chest hollow. The fluorescent lights of the Flagstaff grocery store buzzed overhead, but all I heard was the pounding of my heart. People stopped in the aisle, their carts lined up like curious spectators. The officer's voice was flat, as he said I was being detained for theft. A store clerk stepped forward holding up a small evidence bag. Inside was a gold pocket watch, its surface worn smooth from age, but still gleaming under the lights. My breath caught. I knew that watch. I had bought it last year from an antique shop in Prescott. I had the receipt at home in a box my late wife once kept under the bed. Yet here it was, sealed away, labeled as stolen. Before I could gather words, I saw him. Daniel, my son. He stood near the end of the aisle, hands tucked into his jacket, face pale but steady, when the officer asked if he had seen anything. Daniel lifted his chin and said he had watched me slip the watch into my coat pocket. My stomach twisted as if the air had been knocked out of me. The blood drained from my face. I searched his eyes, desperate for a sign this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, some terrible mix-up. But his gaze was cold, fixed, unflinching. The shoppers whispered, some shaking their heads, others staring at me as if I were a criminal already convicted. I wanted to shout to explain, but the words stuck in my throat. My body felt heavy, the cuffs cutting into my wrists, as if to remind me of the betrayal unfolding before everyone. The officer pulled me through the store. My shoes scraped against the linoleum floor, each step echoing like a hammer on stone. I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflective glass of the freezer doors. A gray-haired man with hollow eyes, hands bound, being marched out like a thief. Shame burned hotter than the Arizona sun outside. As we stepped into the parking lot, the cool evening air hit me. The sky was painted with streaks of red and orange, the kind of sunset Margaret used to love. My heart ached. I thought of her gentle laugh, the way she always told me Daniel was strong but needed guidance. If she could see this moment, if she could see her only son watching me being shoved into a patrol car, what would she say? I turned my head as the officer pushed me toward the back seat. Daniel stood just a few yards away, his wife Jessica by his side. She clutched his arm, her lips tight, her eyes sharp with something I could not quite name. Triumph. Calculation. Or maybe just indifference. I wanted to call out his name to ask why. Instead, all I managed was a hoarse whisper that disappeared into the cooling air. The door slammed shut behind me. The world outside blurred as the cruiser pulled away. The hum of the engine filled the silence, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Every mile between the store and the station pressed down like a weight on my chest. I kept seeing Daniel's face, steady, unyielding. My own son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders through baseball fields, the boy I had worked double shifts to put through college, now staring at me as if I were nothing but a common thief. At the station, they led me through corridors that smelled faintly of bleach and sweat. They sat me down at a metal table, the cuffs still locked. A young officer set the evidence bag on the table. The watch glinted under the harsh fluorescent light. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. That watch was mine. Margaret had loved the engraving inside, a small etching of a tree with roots spreading wide. She said it reminded her of our family, strong and grounded. Now it lay on the table like proof of my guilt. The officer asked routine questions, each one sharper than the last. Did I know the item was valuable? Had I concealed it intentionally? Was I aware my son had witnessed the act? His words struck like blows. I answered firmly, voice low but steady, that I had not stolen anything, that the watch was mine. He wrote in silence, his pen scratching across paper, his expression unreadable. When he left me alone in the room, I lowered my head onto my cuffed hands. The metal pressed against my skin, leaving angry red marks. I stared at the reflection of the watch in the tabletop, my mind spinning. Why would Daniel do this? Why would my own flesh and blood deliver me into this humiliation? Memories tumbled through me. Daniel as a boy riding his bike down our street in Phoenix, scraped knees and bright laughter. Daniel at 12 slamming doors and shouting during teenage storms. Daniel at 22 walking across the stage at his college graduation, while Margaret cried beside me. I had always believed, no matter the rough edges, no matter the arguments, that beneath it all was love, loyalty, family. But tonight, that belief cracked wide open. The officer returned, telling me they would process me for booking, that I could make a call after. His voice was flat, professional, but I caught a flicker of pity in his eyes as he gathered the paperwork. He probably thought I was just another old man who had lost his way, who had stolen out of desperation or confusion. He did not know that what I had lost was not money or dignity, but trust. They led me to a holding cell, the bars cold and unforgiving. I sat on the narrow bench, staring at the concrete wall. The echo of Daniel's words replayed in my head. I saw the firmness of his jaw, the steadiness of his voice as he told them he had seen me take it. I could almost hear Margaret whispering in my ear, asking me to be strong. The cell door clanged shut. I leaned back, closing my eyes. The sound of keys jangling down the hall faded, leaving only the thrum of my own heartbeat. I knew this was only the beginning. And I knew one thing with certainty. If Daniel wanted to see me broken, he had underestimated me. A sergeant with a weary face sat across from me, hands folded, voice steady as he reviewed what he said were preliminary allegations of theft from the Flagstaff store. He asked me to confirm my name and address. He asked if I understood my rights. Then he asked the question that mattered to me more than any other. Did I want a lawyer assigned if I could not afford one? I told him I would not need a public defender. I told him I would retain counsel on my own. We moved through the steps that reduce a life to inventory. They took my fingerprints, rolled each finger across glass until black spirals filled the screen. When they were done, the sergeant returned me to the chair and said the watch would remain in evidence while they reviewed statements and video from the store. I told him I was innocent. I said that the watch belonged to me, that I had bought it in Prescott the previous fall, that I could produce a receipt and bank record to prove it. When I finished, he said my statement would be added to the file. He said an investigator would follow up, that I would be notified. Then he paused, looking at the bag again, and asked if I wanted to make a call. I will make my calls when I am home. He said there was one more piece of information he was permitted to share. The initial report and the item, he said, were not turned in by store staff. He said the person who handed the watch to security and provided a written account earlier in the afternoon was my son Daniel. I thanked him for telling me. When he left, I pressed my palms together and took in slow, measured breaths. The idea that Daniel had not only pointed at me in that aisle, but had set the whole thing in motion settled over me like ash. She would say that storms reveal foundations, that some people lean into the wind and some push you into it. The ache of missing her cut clean and deep, but right behind it came the steadiness she had always given me. They released me on my own recognizance with a date to appear if charges were filed and instructions not to contact witnesses. The desk officer returned my wallet and keys. He kept my phone for a moment longer while he noted the serial number on a form, then slid it back across the counter. A text from Deacon Harris at Trinity Church said that he had heard a troubling story and hoped I was well. Another from my neighbor on Aspen Avenue asked if everything was all right and added that someone had mentioned the police at the store. There were missed calls from numbers I recognized, and a few I did not. Did you do it? I drove home through streets I had traveled for decades, past the park, where I had taught Little League, past the hardware store, where the owner still kept a jar of nails on the counter for old-timers who paid in cash. The world looked the same: porch lights blinking on a dog barking at nothing, the smell of pine rising after a long day of sun. Inside my house, the familiar creak of the entry floorboard greeted me. I set my keys in the bowl by the door and stood a long minute in the quiet. The place felt like it always did, solid and a little tired, the way a good pair of boots feels at the end of a long job. I walked to the mantel and picked up the framed photo of Margaret that I have never moved. She is standing at the lake in Sedona, head tipped back, eyes closed, hair caught in the kind of breeze that makes you think the world will be generous again. I rested the frame against my chest and let the warmth of it thaw something tight inside me. I told her out loud in the empty room that I would not let this stand. No one heard me but the house, and that was enough. A voicemail from a man I had once worked with up in Williams said he had seen something online and hoped it was not true. A message from a mother whose son I had coached years ago said people were talking at the diner and she wanted to hear my side. My side, as if truth needed balance to be believed. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote down the names of everyone who had called or texted one by one, the way I used to make material lists before a big pour. It steadied me, turned the noise into something I could count. I made coffee and drank it standing up, the way I always did when a day had gone sideways. The bitterness bit my tongue and brought me fully awake. I thought about Daniel as a boy, pressing his face to the window on rainy days, asking when the sky would clear so we could go throw a ball. I thought about the man at the end of the aisle, today, arms folded, voice smooth, eyes that did not belong to any boy I knew. Whatever had come between those two faces was a story I would not unpack tonight. There would be time for that, and when it came, I would not run from it. The house settled around me with its usual small sounds. I rinsed the cup and set it on the rack, then took a legal pad from the drawer and wrote 3 words at the top. Name Proof Counsel. Under name, I wrote Daniel and left a blank line after it. Under proof, I wrote Prescott Antique Receipt Bank Record. Under counsel, I left a space and stared at it until the name I needed rose from memory like a beam from a pile of timber. I did not write it yet. I let the certainty sit there, clean and simple. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway for a breath before heading down the hall. On the way to my room, I paused by the photo, again touched the edge of the frame, and felt a calm settle over me that I had not known since the cuffs closed on my wrists. In the quiet of the house, the night held its breath. I was tired, but my mind was clear. There would be questions tomorrow, and there would be answers worth finding. The drive back from the station felt longer than it was. By the time I turned onto my street, the headlights swept over the small front porch that Margaret once decorated with planters every spring. Now it looked bare, a hollow echo of what used to be. Inside, the silence pressed down. I hung my coat, glanced at the photo of her on the mantel, and the hurt deepened. Betrayal in your own blood is a weight that no wall can carry. I had barely sat down when the doorbell rang. I knew before opening who it was. Daniel stood there with Jessica by his side. She wore her polished smile, the kind that never reached her eyes, and Daniel's arms were folded across his chest like he was ready for a confrontation. "Dad," Jessica began before I could even invite them in, "we've been thinking. It's time to make some changes." She stepped past me into the living room, her perfume sharp, her heels clicking on the hardwood Margaret and I had installed 30 years ago. Daniel followed without a word, his face set distant. "What kind of changes?" I asked, my voice level. Jessica smoothed her blouse as if preparing for a performance. "You're not getting any younger. It would be wise to downsize. That lake house in Sedona is just sitting there. Imagine what you could do with the money. It could make your retirement so much more comfortable." The words stung not because of their practicality, but because of the ownership laced within them. The lake house was not just a property. It was Margaret's dream. Her laughter still lingered in the walls there, her touch on every choice of paint and furniture. Selling it was never part of my future. Daniel cleared his throat, his voice cold. "We've already talked to someone who might be interested. A serious buyer." I froze. My chest tightened, and the room seemed smaller. "You talked to someone?" I repeated, my tone sharper. "Without me." "It makes sense, Dad," Daniel pressed on. "That house costs money to maintain. Taxes, upkeep, all of it. You barely go there anymore." Jessica leaned closer to him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her eyes fixed on me. "He's right, Thomas. Why let it rot when you could secure your future?" My gaze flicked to Margaret's photo on the mantel. Her smile, frozen in time, was a silent reminder of what that house meant. Every summer evening spent watching the sun dip below the water. Every birthday we celebrated on that porch. That house wasn't numbers on a ledger. It was memory carved into wood and stone. "You already have a buyer, don't you?" I said slowly, almost whispering. Jessica didn't flinch. She nodded once. "A family from Phoenix. They're ready to move quickly." The blood roared in my ears. This wasn't about convenience or concern for me. It was ambition, calculation, a plan already in motion. My own son and his wife plotting to strip away not just my dignity, but the very place that held the last of Margaret. I stood, the weight of the moment heavy in my chest. My voice was steady, but it carried steel. "That house is not yours to sell. Not now, not ever." Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes dark. "You can't hold on to everything forever, Dad. Sometimes you have to let go." I stepped closer, the air between us tense. "Letting go is one thing, Daniel. Being pushed out of my own life is another." Jessica's smile finally cracked, revealing the sharpness beneath. "You'll see it's for the best." I turned away before my anger spilled into something I couldn't take back. My eyes landed once more on Margaret's picture. Her face steadied me. I took a breath, slow and deliberate. "Leave," I said. "Both of you." Jessica's eyes narrowed, but she tugged on Daniel's arm. He hesitated, his expression unreadable, before following her out. The door clicked shut, and silence rushed back into the house. I stood there, my fists clenched, staring at the darkened window. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft dressed as care. They wanted more than to humiliate me. They wanted to erase me. I walked to the mantel, touched the frame of Margaret's photo, and whispered, "Not while I breathe." The night pressed in heavy but clear. The truth had surfaced. My son hadn't only accused me of a crime I didn't commit. He and his wife were reaching for everything I had left, and that was something I would never allow. At sunrise, I dialed Marcus Reed and left a short message that I needed to see him. Marcus stood, as I came in, taller than I remembered, gray at the temples, the same steady eyes he had the day we poured the slab on my first big job. He asked me to start at the beginning and not leave anything out. I told him about the grocery store in Flagstaff, the cold cuffs, the gold watch sealed in plastic, Daniel at the end of the aisle, saying he had seen me pocket it. I told him about the sergeant, who said Daniel had handed over the watch and a written statement earlier that day. I told him about going home and finding my son and Jessica ready with a plan to sell Sedona like they were talking about rearranging furniture. He said two things jumped off the page. First, a potential false police report, and second, the beginning of a pattern that can fall under elder abuse when an adult child tries to leverage the justice system and community pressure to separate a parent from property. Under evidence, he said, we would need to lock down every scrap that shows the watch is mine. He wanted the receipt from the Prescott antique store, the bank record from the withdrawal that paid for it, and if possible, a note or email from the shop owner verifying the sale. He would draft a preservation letter to the grocery store, demanding they retain all video from the day entrance cameras, cache lanes, and parking lot footage. He said he would also send a preservation request to the police so nothing gets recorded over or purged while they review. Under protection, he said we would review the deed to the Sedona Lake House that afternoon. He would look for any gaps a pushy buyer could exploit and record a simple notice to put the world on alert that no sale or transfer is authorized. He suggested we consider a revocable trust in my name to create a clearer wall between me and anyone who thinks pressure can move me. Under communication, he said I was not to contact Daniel or Jessica about the incident, not in person, not by text, not through a third party. If they reach out, I should log the time and the content and forward everything to him. We would request a sit-down with the investigating sergeant to deliver our packet once we had the receipt and bank record. I asked how fast we needed to move on the store video. He asked the name of any supervisor I remembered from last night. I gave him what I had a last name from a badge and the way the man carried himself. Then he looked up and asked if I had any paperwork at home that could corroborate my purchase, if the shop owner took time to respond. I told him Margaret kept a box with special receipts in a hall closet, and that I believed the watch receipt was there. He pushed a pen toward me and said I should make a timeline while the details were still sharp. Time I entered the store. Time the officer cuffed me. Time Daniel stood in the aisle. The exact phrases I remembered, the smell of the place, even the song that played if I could recall it. He said juries like details because they signal truth, and detectives are human too. I told him Northern Arizona Credit Union on Beaver Street. He said to drive there right after the receipt and request a teller printout with the cash withdrawal on the date of purchase, then have them stamp it. He asked about the lake house. I told him Margaret and I bought it in 2012 cash from a good year and a small inheritance from her aunt. He asked if Daniel was ever on title or authorized on the property taxes or insurance. I said no. He asked if Daniel had a key. I said he did, but that I could account for that later. Marcus skimmed signed too, then slid an engagement letter across for me to read and sign. He said it made official that he represented me and would communicate with law enforcement and any parties or counsel who inserted themselves. When I finished, I signed and dated. Marcus folded his hands and studied me again. He said there was a pattern he had seen before. A son or daughter begins to paint a parent as careless or confused. They seed doubt at church, at work, in the neighborhood. They create a small scandal to bruise the parent's reputation, then step in as the reasonable manager who suggests a sale for safety or simplicity. He said that if the scandal involves the police, it accelerates the pressure. He did not raise his voice when he said it, but the words hit hard. This is not about a watch, Tom. Your boy is lining up your life like inventory. I felt the heat climb my throat and then break into something colder. I asked what happens next. He said next we take away their momentum. He would call the investigating sergeant and introduce himself. He would send the preservation letters now. He would file a notice related to the Sedona property before close of business so no buyer could pretend they did not know. I would go home, find the receipt, go to the credit union, then come back with copies by mid-afternoon. He would draft a short memo that summarized our evidence and request an appointment at the station tomorrow. We would walk in with papers stacked in order and no drama. He stood and I stood with him. He told me one more thing at the door. He said I should lock away anything important tonight that is not already under my roof. He said, "Do not tell me where and do not tell anyone else." It was not paranoia. It was experience. I nodded and felt the truth of it settle. Outside the office, the late morning had sharpened into that high country light that makes every shadow draw a hard line. I stepped into it and filled my lungs. In the cab of my truck, I set the yellow pad on the seat and read the list aloud like a foreman calling tasks. Receipt bank copies deliver. Phone buzzed once and I turned it face down without looking. A breeze moved the maples along the block, and somewhere a delivery truck hissed to a stop. The world kept doing what it always did, and I had a plan I could hold in my hands. I pulled out of the lot, and the phone buzzed in the cup holder. Lily's name lit the screen bright against the morning glare. My thumb hovered a second longer than it should have, then I answered, and tried to make my voice lighter than the night had left it. She breathed into the line like she had run from one end of a playground to the other. "Grandpa," she said, then paused. "I said I was here, that I was listening, and that everything was okay." Words steadied on her side. She said she needed to tell me something about the store. Her voice dropped to a careful whisper, even though it was a weekday, and Jessica would be at work and Daniel would be out. She said she saw her mom with a small box near my coat at the grocery aisle. She said it looked like a jewelry box, shiny the size of the ones that hold rings at the counter she likes to look at. She said she thought maybe it was a surprise, and then people started talking loud, and a man in a uniform came, and she got scared and forgot until now. I pulled into a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood and let the truck idle. I did not ask for more than she wanted to say. Marcus's voice in my head said to let a child give what a child can give no more. I told her she did the right thing, telling me that she was brave, that none of this was her fault. She asked if I was mad. "Not at you," I said. "Not ever." The sound she made on the other end was small and soft, like a leaf sliding over glass. I asked how she was feeling, not what she saw next. She said her stomach felt strange in school, and the nurse gave her a cracker and a small cup of water and said, "Sometimes feelings make your tummy think it is sick." She said she did not want to get anyone in trouble, she just did not like the way my face looked when the man took my hands. I felt the cuffs again, phantom and tight. I told her I was okay now that a friend was helping me, that grown-ups have to fix grown-up problems, and that her job was to be a kid and draw me a picture of the ducks at the lake. She asked if we could go to Sedona when everything is quiet again. Her voice lifted at the word quiet, like she could see the water already. My throat pulled tight around the memories that rose on cue. Margaret's laughter along the shore, Lily's hand in mine the first summer after we lost Margaret, the way she skipped beside me and counted stones out loud, then forgot the number and started again. The afternoon we stood ankle-deep on the red rock shelf and watched a blue heron lift off the reeds with wings that moved like slow hands. The shade under the cottonwoods felt cooler that day, and I had told Lily the lake keeps secrets that only the wind can hear. She had nodded as if that explained everything worth knowing. I told her we would go. I told her we would fish in the morning when the water is a mirror and the world has not made up its mind yet. I told her we would sit on the porch and watch the sky change, and that I would make pancakes the way Margaret did them, thin, with crisp edges, the kind Lily ate 3 at a time even when she said she was not hungry. Lily laughed, then the real laugh that rolls like marbles across a floor. It loosened something in my chest I had not known was stuck. Her voice grew cautious again. She asked if she should tell her mom what she remembered. I felt the line between what I wanted and what was right. I told her she did not have to tell anyone anything by herself. If a teacher or a police officer ever asked her questions, she should ask for me or for another adult she trusts to be there. I said she could always call me first. She said okay in the way kids say it when they want to be done with a scary thing. I asked where she was calling from, and she said the library at school because the librarian lets them use the phone if they feel sad. I thanked the universe for a librarian who knew that sometimes a phone line is a lifeline. I told Lily I loved her. She said she loved me more, then said she had to go, that the librarian was smiling and pointing to the clock. The line clicked, and the truck's engine filled the space she left. I sat with both hands on the wheel and wrote the time of the call on the top of Marcus's yellow pad, then wrote Lily's words exactly as she had said them. A small box near my coat. Shiny. Thought it was a surprise. I underlined the words thought and surprise. Children remember the truth in the way their bodies felt, not the way adults arrange facts. It was enough. More than enough. The drive to my house took 10 quiet minutes. The hall closet still stuck on the top hinge the way it always has. I set Marcus's pad on the shelf and pulled down the cedar box Margaret labeled with a strip of masking tape the year we decided to stop pretending we would ever be tidy people. The smell of cedar and old paper lifted the hair on my arms. Inside, receipts lay in a careful mess. Notes in Margaret's neat hand marked the ones she cared about. I found the heavy stock from the antique store in Prescott against a stack of holiday cards. It held the date, the price, and a description that matched the watch on the station table. I took a photo with my phone, then slipped the original into a sleeve for the credit union to copy and stamp. Before I left, I stood in the living room and called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. I told him Lily had called and told him exactly what she said, and nothing more. He was silent for a breath, then said I had handled it right. He said to write it down with the time and to save the call log. He said not to mention the call to Daniel or Jessica, and under no circumstance to ask Lily to repeat anything. He would note it for the packet, and we would let the rest come through video or other sources. I said understood, and felt the knot in my shoulders settle. On the kitchen counter I found the small tin where Margaret kept pencils sharp enough to score a board. I wrote the next steps on the yellow pad in darker lines. Credit union for stamped copy. Email Marcus the photos. Return with originals by noon. Then another line I had not written before and did not intend to forget. Protect Lily. The house felt different as I walked to the door. Not lighter and not heavier, just aligned. I could see Margaret in the mirror by the entry, her reflection over my shoulder, the day we brought Lily home from the hospital, and she said this child will pull the best out of us if we let her. The memory steadied me more than any coffee could. I locked the door and stepped into a sun that had burned off the morning chill. Halfway down the porch steps, I stopped and dialed the school office. When the secretary answered, I asked her to please thank the librarian for helping my granddaughter call her grandfather. The woman on the line said of course, and there was a kindness in her voice that felt like a hand on my back. I hung up and stood with my face up to the wide Arizona sky. No one is going to hurt this child, I said to the quiet street, and the promise felt like steel settling into place. I told her I needed a printed record of a cash withdrawal from last fall, and that it had to show date, time, and amount with a branch stamp. October 11th, cash withdrawal $2,400. Before I left, I took a photo of the stamped page on my phone and emailed it to Marcus with a short note. Bank confirmation in hand. I told him the credit union had stamped the record and that I was driving to Prescott to see the antique shop owner. He reminded me to ask for any receipt copy they kept and a short written statement that the watch was sold to me. He said if the owner remembered any detail to include it. Even the small things matter. The bell over the door chimed as I stepped into the cool interior. I reminded him that last year in October I had bought a gold pocket watch here, and that I needed a copy of the receipt and a brief note for my attorney. He asked if it was the one with the little tree engraving inside the case. He returned to the counter with a thin carbon copy. He took a sheet of letterhead and wrote in a neat hand that on the specified date he had sold one gold pocket watch to Thomas Miller for $2,400, listing the movement details and the interior engraving of a tree with spreading roots. I asked if he would also make a photocopy of the carbon and stamp the copy with his store stamp. He did, then slid everything across the glass. I thanked him and hesitated. He looked at me and waited. I said that my wife had loved the engraving because it reminded her of our family, and that this mattered more than he knew. He rested his fingertips on the counter and said he understood. He added that if anyone called about the sale, he would confirm it exactly as written. He did not ask for an explanation. He did not need one. On the sidewalk, the afternoon heat had thickened. I stood in a patch of shade and took photos of the receipt, the letter, and the store stamp. I emailed the images to Marcus and texted him that I would be back in Flagstaff by early afternoon. He replied with a single word that carried all the momentum I needed. Good. The drive home felt shorter. At each light, I checked the envelope on the passenger seat, as if it were a living thing. The lake house slid across my mind more than once. Margaret on the porch, Lily counting ducks, the feel of cedar rail under my palm. I let the images roll through me without grabbing any one of them. This was a working day, and memory would be my fuel, not my anchor. At home, I spread everything on the kitchen table: the stamped bank record, the original Prescott receipt, and the shop copy. The owner's signed statement on letterhead. I added the photos I had taken earlier of the watch backside open engraving visible. I labeled each item in small pencil on the corner the way I used to mark joists during a build so the crew knew left from right without thinking. Then I slid the stack into a manila folder and wrote Evidence A on the tab with a ballpoint. No drama, just clean lines. I called Marcus and told him I was on my way. His office smelled like lemon cleaner again, and that same paper dry scent. He cleared a space on his desk and laid my documents out in order. He checked each stamp and signature, then used his phone to scan everything into a single packet. He slid a short cover letter in front of me addressed to the investigating sergeant, summarizing that the watch predated the alleged theft and attaching proof of purchase and bank records. He asked me to read it. I did, lips moving without sound, to pace each sentence. It was exact without being dramatic. It sounded like the kind of thing a reasonable person would write when truth is on their side. He handed me a second page, a preservation request addressed to the store manager in Flagstaff, asking that all camera footage from the day be retained, including entrance jewelry case and any camera in the parking lot that showed the area near the time in question. He said a courier was already en route with copies and that he had spoken to someone at the store who promised to hold the files pending a formal request. He had also emailed the police contact to confirm our meeting for the morning. He tapped the bank stamp with a fingertip and said this would carry weight. Facts are better than adjectives. We sat for a quiet moment looking at the pile that was my morning. Marcus asked if there was anything else I thought might exist in my house. I told him about the cedar box Margaret kept, and he smiled without looking up. Good marriages leave a trail, he said. He did not know he had just placed a hand on a bruise and made it warm instead of sore. On the way out, I paused by his office window. Sunlight fell in a bright rectangle on the carpet. When I stepped into it, I felt heat on my shoulders, the kind that used to fall across our Sedona kitchen at 5 in the afternoon, when Margaret would hang a towel over her shoulder and tell me the pancakes were almost ready for a small girl who never lost her appetite for crisp edges. For a breath, it felt as if Margaret stood behind me not as grief but as steadiness, not as ache but as guidance. The feeling was brief and clear, like a bell struck once. Back in the truck, I placed the packet on the seat and rested my hand on it. I did not say anything out loud. I did not need to. The day had done what it needed to do. We were parked in front of Marcus's office before the sun cleared the roof's packet on my lap, coffee cooling in the cup holder. A detective with a trimmed beard met us in a briefing room and introduced himself as Sergeant Keller from Flagstaff, assigned here for the day. We sat at a metal table while Keller skimmed the cover letter, flipped through the stamped bank record, the Prescott receipt, and the handwritten statement from the shop owner. He said our preservation requests had hit his inbox the night before, and that he had already spoken to the store's loss prevention manager. The manager had pulled 3 angles for the hour around the incident and uploaded them to a secure link. Jessica appeared at the edge of the frame. In her right hand was a small square box, the kind jewelry stores use, glossy and dark. She closed the distance while I bent to check the expiration date on a carton. Keller ran it back 3 seconds and played again. Jessica dipped her shoulder and with a smooth motion slid the box into the inside flap of my coat, then straightened and looked past me. Daniel stood at the end of the aisle, not close, not far, eyes scanning. It showed the same motion from above Jessica's hand, disappearing into the fold of my coat and reappearing empty. She adjusted her collar, glanced once toward Daniel, then drifted away. The third camera caught her a minute later, discarding the empty outer sleeve from a jewelry counter box into a trash can near the floral section. No one spoke for a few seconds. Marcus finally said that the recording appeared to contradict the sworn statement the department had taken from my son. He said the report from Daniel had stated that he saw me remove a watch from a display and place it in my coat. Keller said the video we just watched showed no contact between me and any display case and did show another individual placing a small object into my coat pocket while I was not looking. He asked if I had any relationship to Jessica beyond being the spouse of my son. I said no other relationship. He made another note. He asked me to walk through my memory of the aisle from the moment I picked up the milk to the moment the officer touched my arm. I told him the details I could trust. The way the cold from the dairy case fogged the glass. The song that played faint in the background. The feel of my cuff catching on the cart handle. I did not add color for drama. He wrote quickly and nodded me on. Marcus slid the antique shop owner's letter closer to Keller and said the watch had been purchased last fall, that the bank record matched the amount and date, and that the engraving inside the case matched the photograph already in the department's evidence bag. Keller said he would request the evidence bag for a comparison photograph and that he would reach out to the shop to confirm sale details directly. He said he would also send an evidence tech to the grocery to retrieve the discarded packaging from the floral area trash if retrieval was still possible. He excused himself and returned with a technician who took notes on the time codes and locations. The tech left to make calls. Keller sat again and asked if there was any reason my son might give an inaccurate statement. He did not say lie. I measured my answer. I said there were recent pressures around property and that there had been a conversation in my living room about selling my lake house to a buyer I had not met. Marcus held my gaze to keep me from saying more than I should. Keller said he understood and that for now he would focus on verifiable facts. He ran the video once more. We watched the same small deception happen in clear daylight, while people pushed carts and a child laughed at a display of balloons. It looked almost gentle if you did not know what it was. I felt a clean anger settle without heat. Marcus rested 2 fingers on the table as if holding a tool in place while a colleague drove a screw home. Keller closed the tablet and set his pen down. He said he would be adding a supplement to the report and that he would be reaching out to Daniel and Jessica to clarify their statements in light of the footage. The way he said clarify carried a weight Daniel would recognize. He said I was free to go and that the department would contact Marcus to coordinate next steps. He reminded us not to contact either of them directly and to forward any calls or messages to Marcus's office. On the way out the front desk, Officer nodded as he buzzed us through. The hallway seemed brighter than when we had walked in. Outside the station, the wind carried a dry sweetness from someplace up canyon. Marcus stood beside me in the lot and let the silence run its course. He finally said that the board had shifted. He said the tape was not just helpful, it was decisive, and that from here the case would move under its own weight. I could feel my shoulders drop for the first time in 2 days. I looked past the cruisers to the ridgeline and thought of Lily standing in a school library with a phone pressed to her ear, trying to put language to the shape of an adult world. I thought of Margaret on the porch at Sedona, watching a storm roll in and telling me to wait for the first drop before moving the chairs. We reached the truck, and Marcus folded himself into the passenger seat with the same deliberate economy he used for every task. We had brought receipts and left with something heavier than paper. Back on the road, the red rocks slipped by in patient blocks. My hands were steady on the wheel. The plan had been simple. Bring proof, ask for the truth locked in a camera, let the facts do what they do. For once, that was exactly how it went. The conference room at the Sedona Police Department smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. I sat at one end of the table, Marcus beside me, his hands folded neatly on the manila folder in front of him. Across the table were 2 empty chairs waiting. The air felt heavy with the anticipation of a play about to start, every actor summoned, but the lines not yet spoken. The door opened and Daniel walked in first. His steps were quick but shallow, like he was marching into a meeting he had not prepared for. Jessica followed her heels sharp on the linoleum, her hair perfect, her eyes steady but too bright. She wore confidence the way some people wore perfume too heavy, almost suffocating. They sat down without looking at me. Daniel adjusted his tie even though it was already straight. Jessica smoothed her skirt and crossed her legs with deliberate precision. I leaned back calm, letting the silence grow between us until the detective entered. He was a middle-aged man with the weary patience of someone who had heard every excuse twice. He nodded to Marcus, then to me, and finally settled into his chair. "Thank you for coming," he said. His tone carried no warmth, just procedure. He slid a laptop toward the center of the table. "We'll review the evidence together." Jessica smiled, a brittle curve of her lips. "I'm sure this will clear everything up." The detective didn't answer. He clicked a key and the video flickered to life. The screen showed the jewelry counter of the Sedona supermarket, bright under fluorescent lights. I sat still, my eyes on the image, my pulse steady. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair. The footage played. I watched myself walk past the counter, hands in my pockets, pausing only to glance at a shelf of magazines. Then the angle shifted, another camera picking up Jessica a few steps behind me. She looked around, her gaze sharp, calculating. Then, in one motion, almost casual, she slipped a small box into the pocket of my coat. The room went quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the laptop fan. Jessica's smile faltered. She leaned forward, her voice quick, brittle. "That's misleading. The camera angle makes it look like..." The detective raised a hand. It makes it look like exactly what it is. Evidence tampering. He turned to Daniel. And you said you saw your father steal this item. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it again. His jaw worked as if words were a task too heavy to lift. Finally, he stammered, I must have been mistaken. It happened so fast. Marcus spoke, then his voice calm, measured, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. Mistaken is not the same as filing a false police report, Daniel. You swore under oath. Daniel's face flushed. He glanced at Jessica, but she was staring at the table, her knuckles white against her lap. The detective leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. This changes things. Quite a bit. For the first time in days, I felt the weight on my chest loosen. Not gone, not yet, but shifting. I watched my son's eyes, the same eyes, sauce eyes, that had once looked up at me with trust, now darting uncertain, cornered. You wanted to ruin me, I said softly, not as an accusation, but as a truth laid bare. Not just my name, my life. Daniel looked away, his voice thin. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Jessica finally spoke, her words sharp, desperate. He's hiding assets. He's been planning to keep everything for himself. The lake house, the investments. This was the only way to make him face it. The detective's eyebrows lifted slightly. So you planted evidence to push a financial dispute. Her lips pressed tight. She said nothing more. The silence stretched heavy and undeniable. I let it sit, let it weigh on them. Then the detective spoke again, his tone final. We'll be reviewing both of your statements. False reporting, tampering. This isn't going away. Daniel's hands trembled where they rested on the table. He looked at me finally, his face, pale eyes searching for some trace of the father who had always forgiven him. But forgiveness was no longer a currency I carried. I rose slowly, Marcus standing with me. The detective closed the laptop, the room dimming as the screen went black. As we left, I caught Daniel's voice behind me, a broken whisper meant only for himself, but clear enough for me to hear. I didn't think he'd fight back. I walked out into the Arizona sun, the heat hitting my skin like a reminder. For the first time since the cuffs had closed around my wrists, I felt taller, steadier. The game was no longer theirs to control. The world outside moved as it always did. Cars passed, people walked. But for me, something had shifted. They had drawn their battle lines. Now the truth had begun to redraw them. I took a breath that felt fuller than any I'd had in weeks. Tomorrow would come with its own weight, but tonight I would rest knowing the tide had turned. The phone buzzed against the wood. A neighbor had sent a link. Then another came in from Deacon Harris. Then 3 more from numbers I barely recognized. I opened the first and read a headline on a local site. Sedona couple accused of framing elderly father to seize property. The article was short on detail, but long enough to tell the shape of the thing. A police source had confirmed the review of surveillance video. The report mentioned charges under consideration for false reporting and interference with evidence. A second link opened to a TV station in Flagstaff. The clip cut to the police station steps where a reporter stood under a slate sky and said the department had received documentation that contradicted an initial statement. The phone vibrated with a text from a man I had coached years ago. He said he had seen enough to believe me. At Trinity that afternoon, a message went out to volunteers about a change in the schedule for the food drive. Attached at the end was a note that the church did not condone the exploitation of elders or deceit within families. I saw 2 women on the steps. One reached out and touched my arm. She said she was praying. My neighbor on Aspen waved me over to the fence. He said Jessica had called his wife last week about a buyer for a lake property, and asked if he knew anyone who wanted quick deals. By early evening, a friend from Daniel's old office in Scottsdale called me. He said the office manager had asked Daniel to hold off coming by until things were clearer. I told him I appreciated the call and that there were good people there who did not need to be dragged into this. He said he knew. By sunset, the story reached farther. A social post from a Sedona neighborhood group repeated a rumor that a couple had tried to sell a lake house they did not own. Someone replied with a screenshot of a county record that clearly showed my name on the deed. Another added that a preservation notice had been filed the day before. A third asked if anyone knew the family personally. A fourth wrote a single sentence that carried the full weight of it. No son should do that to his father. Jessica's parents did not stay quiet long. Gerald called me from a number I did not know and spoke fast words tripping over each other. He said there had been a misunderstanding about paperwork, and that any document with his name on it was only exploratory. He said negotiations were normal business, and that no harm was meant. I asked him if he had a signed offer or a contract with my signature. He went silent, then said no, then said his daughter had assured him it was all clear. I told him to speak with Marcus from now on. He said Patricia wanted to talk. I said it was not a good time. The line went dead. A little later, a message arrived from Patricia that managed to be both soft and sharp. She said families sometimes need hard choices, and that older men can be stubborn about changing seasons. She ended with a line about wanting what was best for Lily. I put the phone face down on the table and walked to the back door. The sky had gone that deep Arizona blue that makes the first stars look nearer than they are. I stood with my hands in my pockets and breathed. The next morning, I stopped at the diner on the highway for eggs and coffee. A few heads turned when I walked in. The waitress set a mug down and said she had saved me the window seat in case I needed the sun. Two men at the counter talked in low voices, then one approached my table with his hat in his hands. He said he had not spoken to his own father in a long time, and that the news had made him feel small. He said he hoped we all found a way to live with ourselves. He did not wait for me to answer. While I ate, the TV in the corner cycled through local updates. The reporter referenced community response and mentioned that police were reviewing additional footage and would revisit prior statements. My fork paused over the plate. I could picture Jessica watching the same segment at her parents' house or from the shadow of a kitchen where the walls now felt closer. I wondered what Daniel would tell himself when the lights were off and there was nothing left to lean against. By afternoon, the church held a small meeting for volunteers. I sat in the back. Deacon Harris spoke about service and trust. He did not mention my name or Daniel's. He did not have to. At the end, he said there are times when we are called to stand with the truth, even if it embarrasses us. He said the community would rally around what is right. When we filed out, a man I had known since our sons were in Little League stopped me at the door. He spoke quietly. He said some of the men had a word for Daniel now. He said the old-timers were calling him a bad son. I walked home under a sky that was bright and merciless. By evening, I sat on the porch and watched the street settle. A couple from 2 doors down passed with their dog and waved. The gesture was ordinary, and it steadied me. In the middle of that quiet, my phone buzzed with a message that shook the last bit of doubt from its perch. A parent from Lily's school wrote to say that word had reached the playground that Daniel had tried to take his father's property. Children repeat what they hear without knowing the weight of it. She said her son had asked if being a good kid meant you do not hurt your own people. She said she had told him yes. I set the phone down and listened to the sounds a neighborhood makes when day gives up its claim. A screen door, a bicycle on a driveway, Somewhere a guitar run through chords in a slow, steady loop. The world did not stop for any of this. It rarely does. But it had turned its face toward the truth, and that was enough for the night. The smell of cedar and old paper always takes me to 2012. A hotel chain in Phoenix signed off on a foundation package that kept my crew working steady through spring and summer. I started taking weekend drives with Margaret up to Sedona. We stepped into a cedar-trimmed place above a small lake one afternoon, and I knew before she spoke that this was the one. I told her it was ours. We paid cash and carried only a clean deed and a set of keys out of the title office. "This is home," she said, without raising her voice, and I believed her. We counted the slow steps of a heron along the far shore and argued about whether it would strike or keep walking. We tried to catch the first rain of summer by standing under the eaves with our palms up. That house was not an investment. It was an answer to the years we had given away to jobs and deadlines and missed dinners. I put a carpenter's square in Daniel's hand and told him to sight the line. He wanted to cut fast. I made him measure again while the late light climbed the wall. Measure twice and cut once. He repeated it like a spell. For a while we filled Saturdays with small victories. A birdhouse that did not list to one side. A shelf that held his baseball trophies without sagging. He was impatient, a runner by nature, but for those hours he let the work slow him down. I used to think that was the version of him that would last. Somewhere between the garage and the years that came after college, a different shape took hold. I do not know the moment the line bent. I only know that by the time Margaret was sick, he had learned to turn need into leverage. I stood and walked down the hall to the bedroom we had shared. The closet still held her dresses in a neat row, and the cedar box she labeled with a strip of tape that read, "Important." I lifted it down and set it on the bed. Inside was the archive of a life made by careful hands. Ticket stubs, 3 letters tied with blue ribbon. A wedding program with our names printed too large. I moved those aside and found a manila envelope I did not recognize. Margaret had written my name on the front and then underlined it once. The date was from the winter before she died. I sat on the edge of the bed and slid the pages out. The first was a cover letter from a financial firm I did not know. High Desert Retirement Services in Scottsdale. The next page showed a statement. Traditional IRA. Owner Margaret Miller. Beneficiary Thomas Miller. And then the number that made the room tilt by a degree. 200,000 even on that quarter end. There were 3 more statements behind that one, each showing small deposits over the years I had been busy with contracts and payroll and the 100 line items that carry a business from month to month. She had been building a wall in quiet brick by brick while I carried the visible weight. It was not secrecy in the cruel sense. It was the kind of secrecy born of love and foresight. She knew I would empty my pockets to keep Daniel standing. She knew I would call it family. So she made sure a piece of our life stayed out of reach until a day when it was needed. My first thought was not strategy. It was her. I could see her at the kitchen table that winter with a stack of envelopes and a cup of tea, making sure every form was signed in the right place, tucking the statements into this box, and writing my name so I would find it when the time came. She had handed me a tool across a gap of years. I felt the steadiness of that gesture in my ribs. I carried the envelope to the desk and took a breath until my shoulders dropped. Then I did what I always do when a job shifts from idea to build. I made a list with a blunt pencil. Verify account. Confirm beneficiary status. Request current balance and options. Schedule meeting. I picked up the phone and called the number on the letterhead. A recorded voice placed me in a short queue, and then a representative with a careful, professional tone came on the line. I gave my name and hers and the account number on the statement. She asked for my address and the date of Margaret's passing. I told her. She paused with a softness to her silence and said she was sorry for my loss, even though it had been years. She confirmed the account existed, that I was the listed beneficiary, and that they could schedule a call to walk through options for transfer or retention. She told me what documents they would need: a copy of the death certificate, proof of identity, a beneficiary claim form. She said we could handle most of it electronically. I thanked her and set a time for 2 days out. When I ended the call, the house felt different. Not new, not lighter. More aligned, the way a frame feels after you plumb a corner and the wall lands true. The number itself mattered less than what it meant. It meant I did not have to bend to anyone out of fear. It meant the next steps with Marcus could be taken without glancing at a balance I did not want to see. It meant the lake house was defended by more than stubbornness and memory. I returned the papers to the envelope and tucked it back into the cedar box. Then I carried the box to the small safe in my closet and turned the dial until the tumblers clicked. I reminded myself to send Marcus the confirmation email so he could note the asset in any filings related to protection. I would not spend that money out of anger. Margaret would have hated that. I would use it like rebar hidden inside the concrete of the plan, giving it strength without demanding attention. Back at the kitchen table, I opened my notebook and drew a line down the page. On one side, I wrote the years that had carried us here. The first big contract, the Sedona key on a brass ring, the summer Daniel learned how to lay out a cut without rushing. On the other side, I wrote the work still to be done. Meet with the department again if needed. Lock the title so no sham buyer could pretend confusion. Keep the communications clean and through Marcus. Protect Lily from the backlash the adults had invited. Secure the lake house with the systems Darren had built until the law finished its rotation. Outside, the late morning rolled in bright and hard. A delivery truck hissed to a stop down the block. A sprinkler ticked somewhere out of sight. I lingered on the image of Margaret on the Sedona porch, with her face tilted to the light, and felt the unusual comfort of being led by someone who was no longer here. Her careful hand had reached across time. It did not push. It steadied. I closed the notebook and rested my palm on the cover. The past had given me what I needed. The present had put the path in front of me. I stood and rinsed the coffee mug, dried it with a dish towel Margaret had embroidered with a crooked little pine tree, and set it upside down on the rack. Then I walked to the mantel and straightened her photo by the slightest degree so it sat perfect. There would be calls to make and papers to send and a meeting to set with Marcus in the morning. For now, I let the air move through the house and listened to the way the floorboards answered under my feet. The day could carry the rest. Financial analyst placed on leave after police review of evidence in family dispute. By evening, the blinds were drawn. Later, he would tell me she had left a note that said she needed air. On Monday, Marcus said the department was completing its supplement and that he expected the district attorney to review the file by the end of the week. Daniel came to my door. I let him in. He said Patricia had cried in a way that made him feel like a stray dog under her porch. He said he had sent 3 messages and gotten 1 reply. The reply asked for space and did not include his name. He asked if Lily could still come by. I told him that Lily's time with me would not be collateral damage. He nodded, and his face pinched with something like relief. For a heartbeat, I saw the child who used to run down the hallway toward me with both arms out. Then the present returned to its rightful place. He said he was sorry. He said it twice. He said he did not know what he had been thinking. He said Jessica had pushed and her parents had insisted, and the pressure had been a tide, and he had believed he could stand in it without being moved. He said the video had made him sick to his stomach. He said he did not sleep. He said a lot of things. I let him speak until the words began to repeat. Then I asked him to sit. He sat on the edge of the couch like a man at a clinic. I sat in the chair across from him and folded my hands. I told him I had listened. I told him I had heard every word. I told him that apologies are useful when they are built on truth and useless when they are built on fear. I told him he had not just broken a rule or bent a line. He had chosen to frame his father and to try to remove the ground under my feet. He had done it with deliberation. He put his face in his hands, and the sound he made pulled at something old in me. I looked at Margaret's photo on the mantel and asked for a steady hand. Then I turned back to my son. I told him I did not hate him. I told him I would not carry that. Hate is an anchor for the hater. I told him I would make room for the truth instead. The truth was simple. He had buried himself. Those were the words I used. You buried yourself. He looked up as if the ceiling had dropped. He said I was being cruel. I said I was being accurate. He said he had lost everything. I said he had thrown everything away. He said there was nothing left. I told him that was not true. He still had the ability to tell the truth without decoration. He still had a daughter who would love him if he behaved like a man worth loving. He still had hands that could do work. He did not like those answers. He wanted a reset button. The world does not issue those. He asked if I would help him talk to the company. He asked if I would tell them it had been a misunderstanding. He asked if I would speak to the police on his behalf. I told him no to all of it. I told him my name had been on the paperwork a lifetime longer than this storm, and I would not spend 1 ounce of it lubricating a lie. I told him the only conversation I would have on his behalf would be with Lily when she was older about the difference between forgiveness and permission. He stared at the rug. He said he did not know where to go. I told him that was a question a grown man answers by standing up and walking. He asked if he could sleep on my couch. I reminded him of the order that asked me not to house witnesses during an active review. He had asked for that order without knowing he would need it. He flinched and then nodded, understanding too late the way decisions echo. We stood. He moved toward the door with the careful steps of someone learning his own weight. At the threshold, he turned and said he never thought I would fight back. I told him he had mistaken quiet for surrender. He put his hand on the jamb as if he might lean into it, then dropped it and went down the steps. Gravel crunched under his shoes. The sound faded before the shame did. After he left, I walked to the kitchen and rinsed a glass with water that ran colder than I expected. I set the glass on the counter and let the silence find its own level. The house was the same house as yesterday and the day before that. The difference was in the air. A balance had been restored that had nothing to do with courtrooms or headlines. The thing about karma is that it does not ask permission to arrive. It shows up, sets down its load, and walks away without looking back. That evening, Lily called to say that her art teacher had taped her new drawing above the classroom sink. She said it was of a heron lifting off the lake. She wanted to know if herons get tired. I told her they rest on pilings when the wind is wrong, and fly again when it turns. She liked that. She said she would draw pilings next time. After we hung up, I stood at the back door and watched the last light shake itself loose from the trees. The next day, an envelope came for Daniel from his former employer. He had used my address once for paperwork and never changed it back. I sent him a short text to pick it up. He arrived in a jacket that did not fit him the way it used to. He opened the envelope on the porch. His hands trembled, but his jaw was set. The letter used tidy words and left no edges to grab. Final. Not eligible for rehire. He folded it once and slid it back into the sleeve. He looked at me and there was nothing performative left in his face. I told him he had a choice to make that did not require anyone else. He could begin again without pretending that beginning again erases what came before. He nodded once. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for a speech. He walked to his truck like a man learning to walk on a new surface. The street went quiet after he turned the corner. A wind came up from the west and rattled the leaves in the big ash by the curb. Somewhere a garage door hummed and stopped. I stood for a long moment without moving, then went inside and picked up the legal pad where I had left it. Tomorrow would bring documents and meetings and the slow machinery that puts a story into a record. For tonight, the scales had done their work. Morning brought a hard blue sky over Flagstaff and a breeze that snapped the flags outside the courthouse. Marcus met me at the steps with a nod and a steadying hand on my elbow. Then we moved through the metal detector and down a corridor that smelled faintly of paper and floor wax. In the small courtroom, a clerk called the case number, and the judge looked over her glasses at the counsel tables. The prosecutor rose first, a crisp stack of pages in her hand. She told the court that after reviewing surveillance footage, sworn statements, and corroborating purchase records, the state would not proceed. She moved to dismiss in the interests of justice. She spoke the words clearly, as if she knew they would echo. Sergeant Keller was seated on the bench behind us, jacket on his lap, eyes forward. He gave a short summary when the judge asked for confirmation. He described the store angles that showed Jessica placing the box in my coat and the absence of any footage of me taking property from a display. He referenced the letter from the Prescott shop owner and the stamped bank withdrawal. He kept its spare facts tight as a good seam. Marcus stood only to state that we concurred and to request prompt notice to the agencies that held the arrest record. The judge tapped the file once and granted the motion. She said the charges were dismissed. She noted on the record that the state had acknowledged exculpatory evidence and that I was to be released from any conditions previously imposed. She instructed the clerk to issue notice for the sealing process that would clear my name from any public query. Her gavel came down with a sound that felt like a door closing on a room I would not enter again. Outside on the stone steps, the air felt new. A pair of local reporters waited by the planter boxes, cameras, idle microphones held low. Marcus answered what he could. He said the record would reflect the truth and that we were grateful to the department for moving quickly once the video surfaced. I did not add anything. Some victories do not need adjectives. Keller passed us on his way to the lot and gave the smallest nod, a man satisfied that a line had been set straight. By afternoon, the county site carried a short entry that read, "Ois dismissed." A statement from the department followed confirming that the investigation had developed evidence contradicting an initial report. A second notice said that the office of the prosecutor had filed 2 charges in a separate matter: false reporting, tampering with evidence. Each name was printed in the same font, evenly spaced. The law is not poetic, but it knows how to be plain. Word ran through Sedona as quickly as it had during the storm. At Trinity the next Sunday, the deacon spoke about restitution and the discipline of telling the truth when it hurts. No names. None were needed. People who had held their tongues now let them loose. The phrase lost all credibility, became a kind of chorus. A neighbor told me that the buyers Jessica had been courting stopped returning messages. At Daniel's old office, a memo went out that used phrases like client confidence and integrity standards. He told me later that a security guard had collected his entry card at the door while the receptionist watched the floor. It is a long way down from a lobby that knows your name to a sidewalk that does not. Jessica stayed in California with her parents. Gerald called Marcus once and tried to draw a soft border around what had happened. Marcus kept him on the path. He said there would be a time and a place to discuss any civil exposure tied to the paperwork they had passed around. Patricia posted a photo of the coast and wrote a sentence about starting over. The comments below it were quiet. Likes once given reflexively went missing. The arraignment for Daniel and Jessica took place in the same building where my case had been dismissed. I did not go inside. I stood on the plaza beneath a mesquite and watched through the glass as they lined up with a row of faces that carried other kinds of trouble. When the doors opened, Daniel came out first. He looked older than his years, the skin under his eyes gray, his shoulders sloped, as if the air itself had gained weight. Jessica came behind him with her jaw set and a phone gripped like a talisman. No one called after them. No one offered a hand. The town that once might have given them the benefit of the doubt had made up its mind. A week later, Lily brought a shoebox of crayons to the lake house, and we set them out by color on the porch rail. She drew the dock and the line of cottonwoods and a heron lifting off the water. She asked if we could make pancakes for dinner, and I said that was the only sensible thing on a day like this. We ate on the back steps with our plates balanced on our knees, while the light turned the lake into a sheet of hammered metal. She told me a joke from school that made no sense, and we laughed anyway. The sound loosened whatever tightness remained in my chest. When the dishes were rinsed and set to dry, we walked to the end of the dock and counted the ripples left by a fish that broke the surface. She slipped her hand into mine and said that the house felt safe. The word safe sat gentle in the air. I told her it would stay that way. She leaned against me and asked if people ever stop being mean. I told her that most people are not mean at all. They are just afraid, and that fear makes them pick the wrong tools. She thought about that and nodded, then pointed to the sky where a line of birds stitched the horizon. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest, I stepped onto the porch and sat where Margaret used to sit at day's end. The lake breathed in small silvers of light. The pines whispered in a language that sounds like time moving properly. I let the quiet come all the way in. I thought of the judge's gavel, of Keller's careful sentences, of Marcus's lists and letters. I thought of Daniel standing on the courthouse steps with nothing left to lean on but his own shadow. I did not feel triumph. I felt completion. Family is not always a safe place. Justice finds its voice. I made sure the town saw the price of betrayal. The town had not been asked to take sides. It had been asked to look. It had done that much, and that was enough for me. I went back inside and tucked a blanket around Lily's knees. She stirred and smiled without waking, the kind of smile that has no words attached. I turned off the lamp, left the window open to the night air, and stood for a moment with my hand on the doorframe, feeling the grain of the wood under my palm. The house settled with a soft creak, as if it were answering a question I had not asked out loud. If this story meant something to you, add your voice. Like, share, and subscribe to keep these stories alive. Would you forgive a son who betrayed you?